All right, today we are diving deep into a huge battle that's brewing over one of the most powerful economic institutions on the planet, the U.S. Federal Reserve. We're going to look at the intense political heat it's under, some wild historical parallels, and really, what it all means for our economy.
So let's start with a pretty provocative phrase: low-hanging fruit. This is what a lot of political commentators are using to describe a key person right in the middle of this whole thing. And it's such a loaded term, right? It implies someone as an easy target, vulnerable, and maybe even seen as expendable.
And that really gets to the heart of it. How did Lisa Cook, an incredibly accomplished economist, and, by the way, the first black woman to ever sit on the Fed's board, become the bullseye in a major political power play? This story is about way more than just economics. It's about power, perception, and a whole lot of politics.
Okay, so first up, a target at the Fed. Let's unpack what's happening right now with Governor Cook and the pressure campaign she's facing.
So the whole thing really kicked off with a public campaign aimed squarely at Lisa Cook. Now, just so you know who we're talking about, she's a serious economist, PhD from Berkeley, stints at Harvard, White House Council of Economic Advisors. Her confirmation to the Fed's board in 2022 was absolutely historic. It broke a barrier that stood for 109 years.
Now, this is super important to get your head around. Federal Reserve governors, and that includes both Lisa Cook and the big boss, Chair Jerome Powell, have major job security. You can't just fire them because you don't like their decisions. You have to remove them for cause. And that's a really high bar. We're talking serious misconduct. This whole system was designed specifically to keep the Fed independent from the day-to-day chaos of politics.
But you know what? This kind of thing isn't new. Not at all. To really get what's at stake today, we need to jump in the time machine and go back about 50 years to a pretty shocking parallel involving President Richard Nixon.
Yeah, the most famous or maybe infamous case of a president successfully leaning on the Fed for political reasons stars Richard Nixon and the Fed chair he put in charge, Arthur Burns. It's a story that basically serves as a playbook for what we might be seeing today.
So check out this timeline. It really lays it all out. Nixon loses the presidency in 1960, and he's totally convinced it was because of a weak economy. He was determined not to let that happen again. So in 1970, he puts his buddy Arthur Burns in the top job at the Fed. And then, leading up to the '72 election, Nixon puts the squeeze on Burns to juice the economy and, well, he wins re-election in a massive landslide.
And yeah, the data backs this up. Big time. The pressure worked. You can see here that leading up to the election, monetary policy was way looser than the economy actually called for. Interest rates dropped like a rock. That middle bar shows the Fed was just pumping money into the system, what economists call easing shocks. It basically means the Fed was hitting the gas for reasons that had nothing to do with the economic data.
And just listen to how intense this pressure got. This is a direct quote captured on the Nixon tapes. He's talking about his own Fed chair. This wasn't some friendly policy suggestion. Nixon was treating it like a political war he had to win, no matter what.
All right, so let's bring it back to today. With that history in mind, you have to ask, why is Lisa Cook being called low-hanging fruit while the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, seems way more protected? I mean, they had the exact same legal protections.
Well, this chart really spells out why their situations are just different. An analysis by Sharon Kyle breaks it down into 4 key things. First, political clout. Powell has deep roots with both parties and with Wall Street. Cook, not so much. Second, visibility. Powell is literally the face of the Fed worldwide. Third, what they call institutional entrenchment. Powell, a white male lawyer, just fits the classic mold of who runs things in finance. Cook is an outsider. And finally, she can be framed as a diversity hire, which makes her a really easy target for political attacks on DEI programs. You just can't use that line of attack on Powell, so it's not about the law, it's all about the politics of perception. Okay, but this is where the story gets a really fascinating, almost ironic twist. The whole justification for this campaign against Governor Cook is based on a specific financial deal she made. But, as it turns out, well, just wait.
So here's the specific accusation leveled against Cook. The claim was that she showed gross negligence by signing mortgage documents for 2 different properties calling both her primary residence within weeks of each other. The implication was that this was shady, maybe even illegal.
But, and you're not going to believe this, an investigation from HuffPost and ProPublica found something incredible. Public records show that Donald Trump did the exact same thing he was accusing Cook of.
In late 93 and early 94, he signed 2 separate mortgages, and on both, he pledged the property would be his principal residence.
Here are the details. December 1993, Trump gets a mortgage for a house in Palm Beach. Just 7 weeks later, he gets another mortgage for the house right next door. Both documents clearly state it'll be his principal residence. And the reality? He was living in Trump Tower in New York. Reports from that time confirmed these were investment properties meant to be rented out from the get-go.
Okay, so you might be thinking, this is a lot of political drama. But why should we care? Why does any of this matter? Because the independence of the Federal Reserve is, and I'm not exaggerating, a pillar of our entire economic stability.
Look, when politics starts driving decisions about interest rates instead of, actual economic data, that's when things can go really wrong. We're talking about out-of-control inflation or even financial crashes. That principle of independence is what's really on the line here.
The analysis we're looking at really breaks this down into 3 big dangers. First, the institutional danger. If you mess with the Fed's independence, you spook global financial markets, period. Then there's the cultural danger. Targeting a historic figure like Lisa Cook sends a pretty chilling message that the authority of women of color is fragile and can be taken away. And finally, the political danger. These kinds of attacks are a powerful way to fire up a political base and go after diversity efforts everywhere.
And this isn't just a theory. Let's go back to Nixon for a second. Economists actually studied the fallout from that political pressure campaign. Their estimate, it caused a permanent increase in the U.S. price level of over 7%. Think about that. Political meddling has a real, measurable cost for every single one of us in the form of higher prices.
So it all comes down to this, doesn't it? This whole fight over the Fed is a messy mix of law, politics, and personalities. But when the dust settles from these political battles, when short-term political wins clash with long-term economic health, who is it that really ends up paying the price? That's the question we all have to think about. Thanks for tuning in.